I want to thank Cary Mosier for being here tonight. Cary and I met because we sat on the board of the West Hollywood Design District together. And the first time we met, I asked him a question about how his business started. And I have the chills right now, actually, just thinking about that conversation and just how blown away I was. And the more we talked about how he runs his business, I just became so fascinated because to me, what I feel like we hear in the news, the political climate that we're in right now, it doesn't feel like anyone's talking about how it is possible to create a heart-based business. And it seems to be the messaging that I hear anyway is more about how do we squeeze more out of our employees? How do we, hire less people and pile more work on them? And it's not really about how to grow what I think sounds like a healthy business. So I wanted to talk to Cary tonight about another way of doing things and also, have them as an example. Here is someone who's doing it successfully. So I want to thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite. Excited about it.
So why don't we get right to it?
Dive in.
And I'm going to ask you the question I asked you the first day we met, because I think it's relevant to the subject tonight of sacred commerce and sort of, I think it set the foundation probably for how the business was set up, Café Gratitude and Gracias, Madre. So can you give us the story about how the business started?
Yes. I'm not the founder. The founder are my parents, my mother and my stepfather. The first Café Gratitude was opened in 2004 in San Francisco. Let's see, without making it a really long-winded story, it was born out of a board game, which is slightly unique, where my parents were, basically my mother at the time, I was finishing up college, and my mother had recently remarried, and she's always been of the kind of like spiritual seeking and really emotional in a way that looking for always to causing inspiring businesses and looking to live life in an inspired way. And I remember she had remarried, and she basically, when they got married, Tercy is my mother's name and Matthew is my stepfather's name. They created a context for their marriage. They were kind of like, rather than be married and just do what married people do, what do we want to create as a couple and put our attention behind it and really put some focus and intention around creating it. And so they actually sat down and they were like, why don't we make this board game around this philosophy that we have around living life, which was essentially boils down to, where I put my attention creates my experience. And that circumstances are what circumstances are, and our struggle to kind of constantly corral them and control them and have circumstances dictate our experience is a losing battle. And the only thing we really have control over is where we put our attention and what we put our worship power on, so to speak. And and they were doing, they would do, weird experiments. They were living in San Francisco at the time where, they would pay their toll at the bridge, and they would ask, like, the toll person, like, what are you grateful for? And obviously in that environment, this person's, like, totally disheveled by this break in routine. And they just noticed it was causing a different kind of interaction and an opening that they were inspired by. And so, they sat down and they started to create this board game, which inevitably became called the Abounding River board game. And they had no idea what they were going to do with it. They, but spent a year on it and a lot of money on it. And I was like, what are you guys doing? You guys are losing your mind. Because they're, like hiring artists and building it, and eventually, made like what would seem like Milton Bradley produced, the new age version of the Game of Life. And they had this board game which is available and is online and was the birth of Café Gratitude, where they they said, okay, well, we've got this game. What are we going to do with it? They had no plan. My parents aren't ones to think of like step 10. They're like step 1, then step 2, and then we'll figure it out as we go along. And they called me and they were like, hey, you know that board game we've been working on? And I was like, yeah, vaguely. That thing I thought was a bad idea. And they're like, well, we're going to open a cafe. We're going to open a gaming parlor is what they called it. Basically, we're going to open a little cafe in our neighborhood, and we're going to hang out with the people that come in and play the game. We're going to put the game on every table. And the inspiration wasn't to run a cafe. The inspiration was to have impactful, meaningful conversations with people that made a difference. That was what they were lit up about. Naturally, I shot the idea down right away. I was like, this is a horrible idea. This doesn't make sense to me because I was in this, we run a cafe, it's a gaming parlor. Like, what's a gaming parlor cafe? This doesn't make any sense. And luckily, they didn't listen to 20-year-old me. And so they opened Café Gratitude. It eventually became, at first it was just going to be coffee and croissants, and then my mom and my stepfather got really into raw vegan food. And so it eventually became Café Gratitude, and really the intention was, like I said, it was never in a million years were they imagining opening up more than one. There was no intention to make money off of it. It was, can we create a community gathering place where there's conversations that make a difference that are happening? Because that's what lights us up. And that's what we think is good for the world. And we want to train, on some level, we want to offer people the invitation to look at life through a different lens. Can we teach people that where I put my attention gives me my experience now. Ultimately, who we are now is the future we're living into. And can we create that context for people and have them actually get that? So that was basically, long story short, the first Café Gratitude opened. I was moving to San Francisco and just needed a job, and I was like, I'll work behind the bar, and I'd never worked in a restaurant in my life, and my brother was the manager, so we opened it collectively. I went up and kind of helped with construction, and opened up the first location, and just kind of like it viscerally was for people walking in the door thinking they were just going to get a latte was, startling. It was like, what is going on here? Because there's game boards on every table. A latte is called I'm Loved. All these kind of things that were unique. And, I think there was an element of luck involved. Like, we were right at this sort of cusp when vegetarian food was becoming more popular. But it also struck a chord as something different and refreshing for people. And so that was the first location on 20th and Harrison in San Francisco.
So there are a few things you said that I just want to pick out because I think, to me, they're really important. First is that your parents were concentrating on the things that lit them up. Yeah. So the thing that was so exciting to them, and they built a business around that. They weren't as concerned about the making money part. They're like, what are we going to do that I'm passionate about? So many people say, find your passion. To me, that's the same sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Second is that, and I feel like I am lucky in a way to sort of have this way of thinking too. You said your parents weren't thinking 10 steps ahead. I think sometimes we get in our own way of starting something because we think, I gotta have it figured out. To me, I'm like, just start. Yeah. If you can just start and take one step, and you do figure it out. You figure it out. So I think that's really inspiring to see that they took a risk and did that.
It's something that, there are people that, my parents are one of them, my brother is also another one, who are master creators. They're constantly creating things, and there's an unattachment to success or failure. It's just part of the process that for me, doesn't necessarily come as naturally. I've had to learn it through sort of association. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And even that jargon of getting in your own way is a phrase we talk about a lot in the business, as a particular distinction. Like, rather than thinking you're the victim to certain things, there are aspects of our behavior, consciously and unconsciously, that we are in our own way.
So just so you all know, I am fully drinking the Kool-Aid. I bought the game after I heard the story, and I actually played it over Thanksgiving with my boyfriend. It is so incredible. We cried for an hour and a half playing this game, and and talked about things we hadn't talked about. Like, it does, as you said, like, sort of disrupt your regular routine. But even though we're sobbing, we loved it so much. We left it out overnight and played it again, like a couple of rounds on Thanksgiving morning, before we started doing the Thanksgiving preparations. And we said to each other, this is going to be a part of our relationship.
That's awesome.
We're going to keep playing this game. I bought the notebook.
She went down the merch rabbit hole.
I mean, he did a documentary. I watched that. I bought the cookbook.
I need a T-shirt or something.
The Abounding River.
It's called the Abounding River. I'm sure you can find it online. We sell it in Café Gratitude. I played it, and I haven't played. So I played it I played it in November. That was the.
I'm drinking more Kool-Aid than he is.
That was the first time. No, I hadn't played it for a few years, and there's an element for me. There's an element of discomfort in the game.
Oh yeah.
That obviously, who wants to build a game where you're encouraged to be uncomfortable? But when I'm playing it, and this ties into a lot of things, I recognize that I never really want to volunteer for discomfort, because who does? This is human nature. But we all know, growth is only really available in discomfort. If it's comfortable, you've been there, whatever that is, emotionally or experientially. So it dislodges things that I appreciate in hindsight.
Yeah.
It's almost like the experience of I don't want to go to yoga, and then afterwards oh my god, I'm so glad I went to yoga. I have a similar experience in that in the game. I'm like, no, I don't want to play, and then it happens and I'm like, oh wow, it actually created a conversation that made a difference.
So you talked a little bit about how you first started working at the cafe and overseeing some construction and working behind the bar. How has your role within the organization transformed over the years?
So originally I was kind of a juice bar bartender. Now I oversee all the operations and oversee the business side. What the role that I naturally kind of fell into was controlling the creative chaos.
Oh, interesting.
My parents and, like I said, my parents and my brother, my brother is still involved in the business. They and I mean this lovingly. They have zero planning around everything. It's completely sort of winging it in the moment. And so the place I came in was corralling that and having it be something that we could apply and would be sustainable day to day in the business. So to a certain degree, the structure guy who would be like, okay, that's an interesting idea. How are we going to do that? How are we going to pull it off in a retail environment? How do we not lose the heart of what we're going for, but have it be something that is sustainable? Mm-hmm. So for me, it's like me and my brother are the yin and the yang, where and reality is listen, running a business, you have to make money. You have to, and we had to learn that. That wasn't it can't just, it's not all roses. Hey, just go follow your passion, don't make money. We had to adjust certain aspects of the inspiration that was driving us into ways that, made money and made the business sustainable.
Right.
You have to keep the business healthy. So the role I took on was overseeing that and really making sure that we could reproduce it. It landed the way we wanted it to, and there was something got written down on. Okay, what are we actually going to do? Because so much of we operate in a business, especially Café, Gracias, and Gracias, Madre. On some level, there's a spiritual context to it. Not necessarily religious, but there's a spiritual context on who am I and how to relate to the world and what is my, why are we doing business, ultimately? If we're not here to make money, why are we here? And when you engage in those kind of conversations, I can have the experience that people talk a lot about things but never really say anything. It's a lot of like window dressing, fluffy words. Mm-hmm. And my job is like distilling it in, okay, what do we mean by that? And how is that going to show up for guests? And how is that going to show up for staff? Because it's one thing to be like, to say, our business is about love. I resonate with like, cool, I'm always going to cheer on love, but what does that mean, So I play the role of being a little bit of this, okay, well, what do you, like, debating that, what does that mean?
Right.
Like, what do you physically want to show up in the space that has people feel that, You can't just walk around and say your business is about love.
Right.
I mean, I guess you can, and I'll be cool, but at the end of the day, what are you going to do about it is the unfortunate role I played in running around trying to distill it.
That leads me really well into my next question, which is, in the beginning, and maybe even they might continue to happen as you evolve the restaurants, but did you have any failures that you felt like actually planted seeds for greater success?
Absolutely. A lot of failures. I would say there was an aspect of naiveness in the business in the beginning that...
No one had any restaurant experience, is that right? Or...
My mom had restaurant experience. Mm-hmm. And my mom was like the main cook. My stepdad was the main waiter. I was the juice guy. And my brother was like the pseudo manager, and we were all gonna like share responsibilities of washing dishes and like rotate. It was like so unrealistic. And there was so many kooky ideas that were thrown out that were attempted. And the failures were, I think not going in with this sense of like, we did certain things, like we were like, we're going to pay everyone the same amount of money. So historically in the restaurant industry, the back of the house is all Latino based, and they get paid this kind of nominal hourly wage, and then front of the house walks with hundreds of dollars in tips. And this was Café Gratitude. This was about something different. This was about, creating a different experience in the workplace. So everyone was going to be paid the same hourly wage, and tips were going to be divided evenly. So if a dishwasher worked 7 hours, and you worked 7 hours as a server, you walked with the same amount of money. So there were aspects that were well-intended that just got us, just weren't sustainable, and got us into trouble, and got us in, you get mired in lawsuits around servers being pissed off that they have to share their tips to the dishwasher, and things like this, that despite wanting to create a new type of business and have certain aspects culturally operate different, became challenging. Mm-hmm. And then I think, and I mentioned it earlier, there wasn't any value. We didn't really care about making money, and so there wasn't a lot of framework put in place to make sure the business stayed healthy. So we expanded really quickly, and we were making money. It was successful, but what I mean is everyone was talking about love, right? And they weren't like talking about making profit. It was like, we're not going to become a corporation. And I really learned a lot of sympathy around how corporations become corporations.
Interesting.
And just how challenging it is, despite all the good intentions, when you start having, eventually we had a staff of 700.
Wow.
And it was, you can be the most well-intended business ever, and you're always disappointing somebody. And I think that was a challenge for us to reconcile because we wanted to please everybody.
Right.
And it's not really possible. And yeah, we had to, you know, have some hard lessons around, and, you know, some major betrayal around people that we related to as family that, you know, bailed out and filed lawsuits, and we're like, you know, I don't want to be part of this. And that we didn't have a lawyer, we didn't have an employee handbook, we didn't have.
Right.
This was none of the. Remember, we weren't even admitting we were in the restaurant business.
Right.
We were like, we're not in the restaurant business. We're in like the cultural transformation business. And we had to, you know, you have to have a balance of that. You have to, you know, protect the enterprise and make changes where it's practical and achievable.
Right.
So that was a lot of learning.
You're
there.
just leading me into my questions perfectly.
I don't mean to do that.
It's so good. No, so one of the things that I wanted to touch on, and you just said it there, is, you know, I think it even says on your website that your brand is really about transforming people's lives. And I think you said this to me once. We just happen to be a restaurant, right? So I wonder if you can speak to how that intention sort of forms your best practices, and maybe talk a little bit about your daily practices of business and how that works into it.
Yeah, sure. So we say we're a school of transformation disguised as a restaurant. That's the phrase you're quoting. We are a restaurant. But the reason we say that isn't so much so because we think it's the truth. We say it because it realigns us with the intention of the business. Because it's so easy to get distracted by the challenges of running a business, you know? I can easily spend all my time managing like insurance policies and minimum wage upticks and workers' comp, you know, like all this kind of stuff that just is no fun. So, you know, we purposefully create phrases and commitments and intentions that will remind us of why we're in the business. There's a couple practices that we have at Café Gratitude that we've made up that we find beneficial in order to keep it unique and special. So there's this process called clearings so currently Café Gratitude has 7 locations in LA, and there's about 700 employees. And every day we write on the wall 2 questions, and they change every day. The first one is an example, like, where in your life do you feel stuck? And then the second question would be, what are you grateful for? Is sort of the cliche quintessential one, but it changes every day. What's blessed about your life? What do you love about your life? What's something you have an abundance of? So this was originally created, this structure. So what happens, to be totally clear about it, is people come into work and they clock in and they pair up with somebody. It's usually, for simplicity's sake, someone that's coming in at the same time. So that could be a line cook, it could be a server, it could be a host, it could be a manager. And they spend 5 minutes. Again, I had to break this down into timing because I can get. They spend 5 minutes essentially asking each other those questions. So I would sit down, if me and you were starting a shift, I'd say, where do you feel stuck in life?
Right.
And you'd answer that.
Mm-hmm.
I am not allowed to give you advice. I am not allowed to coach you. It's merely an opportunity for you to reflect where you feel stuck in life. You don't have to share anything overly personal. It's open. Has nothing to do with food. Has nothing to do with running a restaurant. Is really focused on the experience of being a human being and the things that we all go through, and also conjuring up a context that's larger than just, you know, serving food, because we want to have an environment for staff that you're not just here to punch in and serve tables and leave. We aspire to create an environment that you'll grow from in ways that affect you outside of the workplace. So I would say, where do you feel stuck in life? And you'd answer that. And then I would repeat back to you exactly what I heard you say. There's aspects of active listening that are involved in this, because I need to pay attention to you, because mostly when we talk to each other, we don't really listen.
Right.
So it teaches our staff to, one, be conscious of how much we kind of pretend like we listen to one another, but don't. And repeat back what you say, and then ask you what's your emotional experience when your attention's on that. The reason behind that is, again, this concept that where we put our attention as people gives us our experience. That controlling the circumstances, essentially, in order to give you a certain experience, is never going to work. At the end of the day, you choose your experience. Whether that be a good experience or a bad experience, you're the cause of it. You're the source of it. That, on a subtle level, is teaching people that. Okay, what when you feel stuck, what's your emotional experience? What's the emotional experience that gives you? And then you ask the second question: what are you grateful for? What do you love about your life? And then they share that, and then they acknowledge one another. And the aspect of acknowledgement, and this I think is really important in any business, because one of the first things that goes in any relationship is appreciation and acknowledgement for people. When you start a new job or you have a new relationship, whether that be romantic or business, it's all about how great that other person is. And then soon after that, oh yeah, that person is just great. You take it for granted. We all take it for granted. And in running a business, especially a restaurant, keeping acknowledgement and appreciation of one another takes effort. You have to keep that in place. It doesn't occur without effort.
Right.
So we purposefully have people practice acknowledging one another, so that we can keep that, intangible, positive energy in the space. So that process, asking those two questions, you go back and forth, 5 minutes each person. That happens every day with every staff member that comes on to shift.
Does anyone resist this process?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, I still resist it.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's people who are like, I'm working here because I want to do that. There are people who love it. There are people who are like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do this.
I'd be one of those people.
Yeah.
I am here. What are my questions?
Yeah. And you're the one that would take 15 minutes, and I'm like, let's keep it to 5. So there's the whole gamut, and unintended positive consequences of that process. We form a really strong culture of the restaurants quickly. People get to know each other very quickly, and an element of trust and appreciation gets built right away. I recently saw there's this speaker, Simon Sinek. I'm sure probably.
Oh yeah, love him.
I recently saw this one where what makes great leaders, and it was about leaders essentially make people feel safe.
Right.
It was the gist of it, and I was like, oh, that's why clearings work. We didn't design it that way on purpose. It was accidental. But I was like, oh, essentially that process, to me at least, creates an environment where people feel safe to share authentic feelings and authentic experiences. And when people feel safe in a business, they will give much more to you than if they feel opposite of that. If they feel threatened or if they feel unsure. And I realized after hearing that talk that is when I feel like our culture is working really well, is when an element of safety can be implemented and we can have some camaraderie around what it is to be human, and we're all here, we're doing a job, but can we create a context that's larger than just a transaction?
Right. I love what you said earlier about, appreciation, and even equating that into whether it's a new job or a new relationship. There is a a line, I want to say, in the first pages of the Abounding River workbook.
You're such a devotee. It's like
Told you, I'm drinking the
Abounding
Kool-Aid.
River groupie. You're on it.
No, but that it was like, it said something about, I think it was talking about spirituality and faith, and how you can't see faith, but think about when you fall in love. And then if you tell yourself, this person is the one, how does that make you feel? And you believe it, because that's where your intention is, right? And I read that and I just went, wow. Because I think all of it, like, I think I'm a very positive person, but I get stuck in negative things all the time. And, you know, I was telling Brooke and Lena earlier, I got a tattoo just before Christmas as a reminder for my relationship. It says made for me. And this is something that, like, my boyfriend and I say to each other all the time, but, like, we've gotten in fights where I'm like, I don't want to see him for 2 weeks. And it's like, I just have to remember, no, like, there is so much good in this person. Why am I only focusing on this stupid little fight that we had that doesn't really mean anything? Yeah. So I love that that's part of your business practice.
Yeah, you know, it doesn't mean that there aren't things to change and fix and manipulate in a relationship,
right,
or even in a business. Something might not work. It's not about, like, ignore that and just focus on how great it is. So it's a bit of a razor's edge where, yes, things need to be addressed and changed, but ultimately you choose your experience and you choose how you relate to it.
So can we talk about that a little bit more? Like, how do you then sort of handle, let's say, performance issues? You know, because I think that's really difficult. Again, as someone who wants to be leading, like, you know, a positive and sort of, you know, soul-based business, how do you handle some of the negative stuff?
Yeah. And that's an aspect, you know, I could have mentioned that in terms of failures, because in the early days, you know, to get fired by Café Gratitude was really hard. And that wasn't a good thing.
Yeah.
How we handle disciplinary issues now, you know, my view is, well, let me start a couple. One, I have learned that for the most part, people avoid confronting conversations. And we all do it, especially if we're a supervisor and there's someone that works for us, and, you know, it just, at all my restaurants it happens. That creates this, we all can relate to this, it's like some small thing happens but we don't address it, and then it's a slow build, and then eventually there's some thing and it's just got all this baggage carried behind it, and so it seems overblown and out of proportion. So for me, I try to encourage the management, and I try to uphold it with myself, you know, tell people the truth. One, tell people the truth.
Yeah.
And don't be attached to being right. Like, and there's certain phrases that I use purposefully where I might say, I'm making up that you're like this. I'm making up that you're not doing a good job. That's an entirely different sentence than you're not doing a good job.
All right, I want to write that down. Somebody write that down for me.
Because in dealing with, you know, disciplinary issues, it's important, in my view, to take responsibility as the person who's having the experience, as opposed to blaming the person. Because one, it's just good strategy. You're good if you blame the person, they're just going to go defensive. And ultimately, you are responsible. Again, this goes back to you are responsible for your experience. So rather than being like, you're a jerk or you're a bad performer, no, like, you've created, you know, where have I failed to communicate either what I expect, or have I not given you the tools you need to complete the job?
Right.
I always look at it from the perspective of where have I failed, because I presume that everybody working for me wants to do a good job, and if they knew how to do it and had the tools to do it, they would do it.
Right.
So I'm always going to start what I say generous assumptions. Like, I'm going to assume that you intended to do it right, or you intended to be here on time and do these things, but somehow I created an environment where that made challenges. So, you know, I will use the phrase, I'm giving myself this experience.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you have to tell people the truth, and I'm okay with being wrong. Like, because I always, especially, I was really, you know, I started managing the stores when I was in my early 20s. Speaking up to people was terrifying to me. And I had to basically, but at the same time I had to do it, right? I was managing a store. And I just basically butchered a lot of conversations. I had a lot of bad approaches to these conversations. And then I remember one day I had this awareness. I was like, listen, if I screw it up, like if I mess up this sort of constructive feedback that I'm intending to give this person, I'll just apologize for that. Like, I'm okay with saying I screwed that up. Doesn't mean I don't want the behavior to change, but I was willing to apologize. I realized I was always willing to apologize for, like, hey, I shouldn't have said it that way, or
Right.
hey, I caught you off guard, or I didn't create the context. I was clear enough that I was responsible to own it. So I was like, I'm just going to have a bunch of conversations all the time, and I'm going to screw up probably a lot of them for a long time, and every time I screw it up, I'm going to get good at apologizing for screwing up the conversation. And I'm going to keep doing that until I get comfortable doing it.
Right.
And then I just got to the place where I got comfortable doing it. And once you're comfortable doing it, it actually lands like it's not personal. For the most part, it lands personal when we're like we've got all this stuff we're adding to it, and we're nervous about having the conversation, and it just comes out in a way that we don't intend it to. And it's not personal. For me, there's who the person is as a human being, and then there's like the actions that they've taken or the job that got done. Those are two separate things.
Right.
But most people hear those as the same thing. So I try to spend time and I try to use particular verbiage to separate the two. There's who you are, and then there's what got done. And who you are is completely separate from what got done. And so, you know, it's still a process, but disciplinary action, when done right, if anyone ever is getting fired, they shouldn't be surprised they're getting fired.
What are the steps that you go
No,
through?
I mean, you know, there's like progressive, like one, you know, they'll have standard stuff, a verbal warning, and then they'll have a sit-down meeting, and then they'll have written documentation for legal reasons and all these things. But for the most part, I want my managers to, I want them to spend more time with the people that they're challenged by and less time with the people that are easy to deal with. Generally what happens is the people that we're struggling with, we start to ignore.
Right.
Because we're like, I don't want to deal with that thing over there, which just makes it worse. So whenever, and we're actually really good at this as a company. You know, it's kind of like you have to constantly be emotionally cleaning the space constantly. And if you're good at it, you catch it early as opposed to waiting for it to be this big ordeal. And yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, people will write something and I can sense it, or even the way they're talking about a staff member. But like, if you're incomplete with that person, it is your job to get complete with them. And sit down and say, I want to have a clearing with you, and say, here's the experience I'm giving myself, that like I can't count on you, or the experience is, you know, you know, you're always late or something, you know, and I want you to succeed. So what can I do to have you succeed?
Right.
But there's like, so take responsibility, you know, make a request, and then commit to different actions in the future. I usually use those like 3 things. I'll take responsibility for it. Here's my request going forward, and here's what you can count on me for my portion in this going forward.
Right.
So I try to coach people into that structure so it doesn't get all, I mean, it can get wonky. People can get all over the place.
Sure.
And it's all just fear of not being liked.
Right. Right.
And if we can be honest about it, it helps make that conversation not land so personal.
No, I think those three things, because it's interesting having worked for people, and now this past year I had my own business and building a team. It's a whole different experience, like being like quote unquote someone's boss.
Yeah.
After working for someone, and I think it takes a very, I don't know if it's a secure person, an evolved person, or just someone who really cares to take responsibility for their part in it as a boss. Because I haven't had many bosses that have been able to take responsibility for, but seriously, so
No, yeah,
like,
I mean,
but I think that's really important. And for whatever reason, I shouldn't say I kill myself, but I do always ask, like, what's my part in this? Like, and I'm not saying I'm perfect, because there are people here that know I'm not.
Yeah.
But, but communicating, especially, I think when, I know it happens to me anyway, when I get overwhelmed or I just have so much work going on, it's like, oh my God, I just had to have 7 phone calls in a row with clients. The last thing I want to do right now is call my employee, and I really know that they need to talk to me about this, but I just can't do it today, And it's, yeah.
So we say it's 100%, 100%. You're like, rather than 50-50,
Yeah.
I'm 100% responsible for the situation. That doesn't mean it's the truth. It's just the only place of any power. Because if like I'm only half responsible for the disconnect in me and your relationship. You're just not in the driver's seat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we encourage, when we have phone calls with management, it's like, great. So you're like, if you take 100% responsibility for the situation, where can you see you contributed to what's currently in existence? And that helps, start the conversation there. Again, it's not about getting wrapped up in the truth or tit for tat. It's like, it's the place of empowerment, and it's a perspective that leads to good leadership, I think.
Yeah.
And leaders should apologize first.
Right.
Yeah. That's why the phrase leadership is lead. They go first. And when you have bosses and supervisors that are taking responsibility for the current environment, ironically, the environment that shows up is like, oh, no, I can see where they'll offer up where they've failed in their part of it, rather than you having to pull it out of them and try to get them to see it. Yeah.
I love that. So I think you've touched on this question a little bit, but I want to ask it directly. How have you been transformed by working in the business?
It's in every way possible. I started working for Café Gracias when I was 20. I'm 35 now. So also a period of my life when going through 20s and early 30s, it's like all these things are changing. But one of the things I'm really thankful for around my parents is they put me in situations they were clear I was unprepared for. And they trusted I would figure it out. Mm. And I recognize that in hindsight. Like, what were you doing? Like, I had no business being in charge of this or doing this. And it like I said, it forced me into uncomfortable situations that I wouldn't have volunteered for, that I think provided me with a lot of growth and maturity. But yeah, ultimately I'm I'm more interested and passionate about the human experience, and interested and passionate about the people that I work with, and really want to make a difference in their lives. Whereas previously, you know, I was afraid of it. I was afraid of people. On an honest, authentic level, I was ultimately afraid of people. You know, how was I going to navigate each relationship? And I think I was constantly being put in situations where I had to figure it out and be the leader and create something. And I failed multiple times, and I still fail at things. And it had me not take it so seriously. It had me have compassion for people, and yeah, I think really helped me learn how to communicate. Mm-hmm. I had to quickly learn how to articulate what I mean and stay committed to, you know, stay committed to people and not be so avoiding of drama. You know, I now know that I should seek out kind of the discomfort as opposed to, I mean, and I still do it. Like I recognize times when I'm like getting comfortable and resigned and cynical, and I have an awareness around that now as opposed to thinking that's the place I should reside.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I think that's, I don't know, it's hard to look back, like how I, you know.
Did you ever think about quitting? Like, was it ever a thought, like,
yeah,
I don't want to do this anymore?
Still think about
it.
And, you know, I think the conversation around, like, you know, because especially the restaurant industry, I'm like, man, this is a grind. This is like 7 days a week all the time. And I question it at times still, but you know, when I feel most inspired by my job is when I can create an environment where someone can share really transparently and they feel safe afterwards. And I'm inspired by that. I recognize that for the most part, because right now, you know, I'm 35 now, but a lot of the people that are working with me are, you know, in their 20s, and there's a fear of like, how real can I be, and what elements of my own process and insecurities and fears and aspirations can I share? And when I recognize people really open up and they're met with acceptance, no matter how nasty or judgmental or screwed up it is, that feels good to me.
Yeah.
I want to create a business where people feel safe.
Right.
And that has me that keeps me inspired. I'm not really inspired about like achieving 20% food cost and like selling a lot of margaritas.
Right.
You know, I'm like, okay, you know, you have to do it. There's part of the business. But what lights me up is, and what keeps me engaged, is that it's so people-based. You know, if I was left to my own devices, I'd somehow hermit out. I'd figure out some way to make money off the internet and like go live in Bali, which, you know, would be fun for, I guess, a short period of time. So it forces me to stay engaged with people, which are the most complicated part of life.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
And but that's where aliveness for, I mean, I'll speak personally. My experience is aliveness only occurs when there's risk and uncomfort.
Right.
And I'm forced on a daily basis to do things I don't want to do and have conversations I don't want to have. And I think that's important. I recognize that it's giving me a life that I feel like is pretty rich and rewarding.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I have two more questions before I want to open it up to the group. The first is, since you do have such a unique environment that you've created, I mean, you were talking about the clearing questions earlier, and do people like resist that? So how do you attract the right sort of employees?
I don't know. I don't have a secret sauce for that. General rule of thumb, I hire for personality, not for skill set. Like, I look for someone that resonates with the mission of the business and is someone I'd want to hang out and spend time with, rather than, oh look, they've worked at all these amazing restaurants. They'll know how to sell a lot of wine or whatever. And I've done that. But I've learned to hire, like I said, on personality and passion and alignment with the mission of the business, because the other aspects I can teach.
Right.
And you know, the Cafe Gratitude, you know, I'm lucky because Cafe Gratitude is so unique and in some ways very polarizing, that there are people that absolutely love it, or they like absolutely hate it.
Right.
And the people that love it show up and they're like, I want to work here. You know, I really want to work here because I'm, on basic levels, I'm vegetarian or I'm vegan and I don't want to serve meat anymore. Or like, you know, I've been a customer and I want to work in an environment that feels inspiring and uplifting. But it's still a process.
Right. Right.
And yeah, but we've gotten better at it.
Okay, so for my last question, you know, I have quite a few members and women here tonight who are moms, and I know you're a dad. And a question I get a lot from members who do have kids is, you know, how do I balance it all? So, you know, if you had one piece of advice to share with people with kids, you know, sort of what would it be in terms of how do I balance, you know, career and family?
I'm new in the parent game. My son's 3.5. So I speak with, I predicate this with that level of experience. What comes to mind is, you know, there were times in the past when I lived in this fictitious world that I could get it all done. And then when my to-do list was clear, I could then turn off my work brain and engage in family life brain. At least that's how it works for me. And I recognized at some point that the to-do list never ended. And so I just stopped. Like, I purposefully walk away at a certain time and have become emotionally resolved to it will be there when I come back.
Right.
And yeah, I just go, okay, I'm done. I'm going to close my email. I'm not going to worry about it. And I'm going to go home and I'm going to, you know, be present with my family. That's a hit or miss.
Listen, this is something I'm working on too. I mean, I spent last year working way too many hours. I mean, many 12 plus hours a day, and I was sick 70% of last year. Yeah. So like my sort of commitment to myself this year is like, I mean, I got to at least rein it back to 10 hours a day, yeah. You know, but hopefully 8 like a normal person. But, and you know, I just had an experience, I want to say it was on Friday. I had been up because I'm an early riser and I like to jump right into work, like first thing. I know they say not to do that, but it's just the way I think I'm built and I get a lot done. But, you know, so if I start work at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
and I work till 6, I have a 12-hour day. So Friday, it was 5 o'clock or just before 5, and I was toasted by 5. And I knew I still had just like you said, a to-do list, a stack of emails sitting in my inbox, and I was like, you know what? Same thing, they're gonna be there tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I did that tonight too. Before I came here, I was like, I need an hour to prepare for tonight. I'm not going to sit and look at email
Yeah.
and not be prepared and feel flighty. And I think it's so important. And it's not an easy thing. I don't know if any of you struggle with that, but
Yeah, the email thing is a whole.
how do we get less email, right? I kind of want
I mean,
less email.
there's multiple
Move to
strategies
France.
for it, but yeah, no. I mean, I mentally set a time when I just will stop,
Yeah.
and then it's on to things that actually make a difference.
Right. Right. No, I have
I'm
to
like,
do that too.
Maintain,
Yeah,
maintain,
right.
maintain. It's 1 o'clock. I'm off of email, and I'm
Right.
in the store, and I'm in front of
Yeah.
people. This is actually making a difference, as opposed to the, okay, great, got it emails that are going back and forth.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's no deep wisdom there. I just stop and I
Yeah.
walk away, and if it's an emergency, it'll find me.
Right. So I want to open up questions to the crowd. Does anybody have any? Yes, Brooke.
Actually, I have one thing to say and then a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The same when you were saying, like, we create our experience, I think people hear that and they think that, like, they're in control of their experience as far as to, like, what happens. But it's like things arise,
Yeah.
and then how you respond to them is how you
Yeah, that's what I mean by
control
that.
it.
Yeah.
And so people like think, oh, I'm controlling it all. It's like, no, you're not controlling anything. The only thing you're controlling is how you respond to it. So
Yeah.
that was a really good.
Yeah, that's what I mean by that.
Yeah, no, that's what I got.
And and that's on a very practical, like, obviously I'm speaking in the context of restaurants, so it can show up like, oh, I didn't get a tip on that table and my night's ruined, or oh, I just got slammed, or whatever the challenges that they face. If we're doing it well, we have an environment, and we've trained people to trust that, okay, well, great, well, how am I going to respond to it in a way that's going to have me feel empowered and inspired and effective, as opposed to being victim to it.
So my question, and I don't know if you can even answer this, but, so like 15 years ago when you started, like the whole spirituality was sort of, I mean, it was definitely there as far as being sort of the zeitgeist of the population, but now it's sort of like trendy to be spiritual. So do you feel like your success is based on people that are truly spiritual, or is it more of like a trend? Like, do you see, I don't know if that's even a fair question, that there is this sort of trend, and that you're sort of popular because of that trend?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to. Yes.
Not to discount. Not to discount.
Well,
I
no.
go to
I
restaurants,
understand.
told you that.
I understand that. Yes, I think that there's an element of luck involved in this. Being, in 2004 we were all plant-based, gluten-free, kind of. I'll speak to this and I'll get to the spiritual stuff. There were aspects of the food menu that we coincidentally were there, and that became popular and trendy, and we were in the right place at the right time operating restaurants while kind of the rest of the people started to open them. On a spiritual context level, yes, I'm terrified of expanding Cafe Gratitude, because as soon as it becomes gimmicky, and maybe people already have the experience that it's gimmicky, that feels distasteful for me. So I'm trying to actually, walk my talk on some level, but I'm trying to actually live it and practice it in ways that don't make me money. Like, I'm trying to do it, actually be authentic about it. Like, the clearing doesn't make me money.
Right.
It actually costs me, if you were to add up the time, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars a year that I pay people to talk about their feelings. So do I think it makes good business sense? Yes, but there's an element of faith involved. I'm like, hey, if I nurture and create an environment that I think is inspiring authentically, that it'll pay off in terms of having a good environment be created. And I think there's an aspect of like always recognizing that like, you know, yesterday's transformation is tomorrow's ego trip. And I'm full of shit as well, you know, and having a business that's being willing to be like, oh, we're full of shit. Like this is, we fall out of, you know, the 10 commitments to tools that you guys were handed out. I fail on that on a daily basis. So I'll only feel like a fraud if I'm like, oh, we're perfect at this all the time. And I don't think we do that. I think we're honest about where it's aspirational. It's written on the wall so that when we're off that path, we can be like, whoa, we're so failing at this. And, you know, and it's important for me that to create a brand that isn't communicating this is the truth. I don't want to be like, this is how you should be. It shouldn't be you should be grateful. We have this funny, we say we don't should on me. Like, like don't have the brand occur and authentically believe it. This isn't like the truth of the way you should live. It's just one option. You know, Café Gracias is one option. You want to, you can, now there's plenty of vegan options. And there's plenty of environments that you can enjoy plant-based food in. So it's important for me that it doesn't become, like I said, the truth or dogmatic or, because I just don't, it's not what I'm into and I don't think it's real. It's mostly aspirational and a constant work in progress. But yeah, there's, you know, like when The Secret came out, I was like, oh, that helped. You know, or like things like that'll happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, over here.
Hi. So first I just want to say in 2010 I was commuting from Santa Cruz to Emeryville, basically working to pay for the gas to go to work. And so I would go to Café Gratitude in Berkeley often because I lived off, is it the Grateful Bowl, the donation?
Yeah.
I'm like, the only thing I eat for a while, I love it. So thank you. But anyway, there's a notable difference in your Santa Cruz location, for example, and the Berkeley, I don't remember the San Francisco one too well, compared to the ones here. And I was wondering if that was a conscious decision or just why they're so different.
Yes, conscious decision. Different, so on a practical level, different partners involved in it. So that changed the look and feel. And also just
Did everybody hear that question, by the way? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also just the arc of the business. We opened up in San Francisco, as I mentioned, you know, laughing and scratching mom and pop operation. We would open a restaurant for $300,000. Now we spend $3 million. And that's just the evolution of any business. Like more people got involved and more designers, more architects, and it transformed the environment. There was a concerted effort to turn plant-based food away from something that you kind of had to be punished in an environment to eat, like a hole-in-the-wall, dirty hippie joint, which you could say some of our environments up north were like, and some still are, and bring it into an environment that was more appealing to everybody. So there was a purposeful effort around that. And when we opened LA and we opened Larchmont, and since then, you know, we purposely make them look really pretty. And most of our customers aren't vegetarian or vegan. They're mostly women in our customers, our target demo. Mostly women, and a lot of people bring women, whether it be girlfriends, friends, or wives, bringing in the husbands who are like, "Arr," and then I don't want to go there, or they are lied and they don't know they're going there, and then they become, you know, devotees of it, or frankly, you know, the health issues that people are facing on a daily basis drive them into the restaurant, because heart disease and other issues are becoming more and more prevalent with heavy meat consumption, and we're there to offer a solution in terms of diet to that. But yes, you're right, they're very different from up north and here. There's an aspiration to go up and remodel and bring them all into some cohesive experience.
Okay, let's take one last question. Amanda?
Hi.
Hi.
Speaking of health, I know we talked a lot about like the people that work there
Mhm.
and the environment that you've created. Also the customers that come in, do you practice vegan? Do you practice vegetarian yourself? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
No. So my family, and this is, my family was, my mother, my father, my brother, myself, were all vegan, vegetarian my brother for his whole life, my mom for maybe the past 20 years, my stepfather for, 30 plus years, me for the past 10 years. And this is a fairly long and involved story, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. Vegan, vegetarian for a long time. My parents started farming organically. They own a farm and live on a farm up north, and farm biodynamically in a permaculture fashion, which involves rotational grazing in animals. And so they started eating meat. They eat the meat only from their farm.
Got it.
That's a sort of a choice they recently made, based on stewardship of land and raising animals and being responsible for that process. So that has been a recent change.
My follow-up question to that is, do you think it's, with the health issues and things that are going on in the world, do you think it's important to be able to reach out to as many people as possible with the restaurants that you have, having healthy food? Being able to like have people, like as many people come to your restaurants.
I mean, yeah, I want as many people as possible to come
Well,
to
I
the
know
restaurant.
that, but like affordability, like
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. So couple things. I don't want to fall into that.
obviously you can make money.
I don't want to fall into. I don't want to fall into veganism is right.
Yes.
For some people, it isn't. Okay, and that's fine. And great. I want to occur as a restaurant as an option. Like in the past, like what do we want to have? Mexican? What do we want to have? Italian? What do we order pizza? In the future, one of my aspirations is, well, let's eat vegan tonight, or let's eat plant-based tonight.
Right.
And hopefully, I'm available and opened in your city, and that's an option for you to come to a Café Gratitude or Gracias, Madre, and have an equally, exceptional experience to any other sort of restaurant out there, and have the plant-based aspect be sort of the cherry on top. I don't have to compromise all these other things in order to eat healthy. I still want a great environment. I still want it to be hip and fun and cool, and I can get a cocktail and all these other things, but I know that everything's organic and everything's, made in house
And delicious,
responsibly
by the way.
sourced and delicious. Yeah, and delicious. So, yes, I want as many people to come as possible, and I'm trying to do that as often as possible.
I'm going to give him another plug. One thing which I found out, I think one of our more recent conversations, and I mentioned this earlier, is that he made a documentary. How many years ago is it? Because you look real young.
Yeah, I know. When I told you to watch it, I was like, oh god, it's so young in that 2010.
It's called May I Be Frank,
Maybe
right?
Frank. See, you can watch it online. It's essentially the opposite of Super Size Me. That was the premise. Was bring someone in, It was a regular. I'm going to answer your question all the way too.
Yeah.
Well, let me wrap this, and then I'll do a quick plug for the film. Yes, and the affordability aspect.
Yeah, I just find it like
Yeah.
eating
No,
organic,
it.
eating
I mean,
healthy,
listen.
so-
It's where I've tried to respond to that is I've put dishes on the menu that are like by donation only.
Really?
Yeah. So there's a bowl called the Grateful Bowl, which is essentially basic components that are affordable for me to produce. That in the past you could pay whatever you wanted for. So when the financial recession hit in 2008. This could go into a longer interview, but we were like, okay, everyone's strapped for cash. Rather than constraining, why don't we do the opposite and give? Again, no business sense behind this. It was all like driven by, this seems like the right thing to do. So we created a Grateful Bowl, which was pay what you want. We wanted to create, it's quinoa or rice with black beans, garlic, tahini. And so we created that and promoted it. And some locations quickly became known as like, oh, that's that $1 Grateful Bowl place. And it was like, had a line for the dollar or the penny Grateful Bowl. And it was pay what you want, meaning some people would give me $1 and some people would give me $500.
Wow.
So the aspirational faith-based experiments was, if you can afford it, essentially pay more to subsidize for those who can't.
Yeah.
So like David LaChapelle, the photographer, I'll give him a plug because I think he's a great dude, came in, gave me a lot of money for the Grateful Bowl.
Wow.
So that I could afford to sell it for $1 to other people or pennies. And it was community, and we advertised and we're like, listen, like pay what you want. And so I would constantly take, minimal amount of money, but it roughly flushed out to, I got on average about $5 for the bowl. So I would obviously track it and kind of make sure we weren't losing our shirts on it. But that was a cool experiment. It's still available. So I try to do things like that because organic food is more expensive.
Yeah.
And hopefully I can get big enough to where I have enough buying power to where I can use that pressure to create it to be a really affordable price. At this point, it's as affordable as I can make it, while still maintaining, the cost it is to run a business, especially in California. And there's certain aspects of that we do. And then the May I Be Frank quick thing, because I know you're trying to wrap up. We started out with like, let's do the opposite of Supersize Me. And there was this regular customer coming in named Frank, who was overweight. I didn't notice at the time, we came to learn, addicted to all these prescription drugs. Ex-alcoholic, ex-drug addict, and came into Café Gratitude because he thought it was an AA thing, because gratitude is part of AA. So he's like, gratitude must be AA. And came in and wouldn't touch the food, had no interest in eating the food, would get a cup of coffee and just liked us because he's like, these guys must be high because they're so happy all the time. Like he thought we were, smoking weed and was like, all right, cool. They're like, happy guys. I'll hang out with them. So he was coming in all the time, and we struck up a friendship because he was a regular customer, and then we proposed this idea that me and my brother had been kicking around of doing the opposite of Supersize Me. And he's like, all right, sure, I'll do it. So we filmed him for what ended up being 42 days, because the workbook, the Bounding River workbook is a 42-day practice. And I thought it was going to be this physical, like how Supersize Me tracks the physical transformation of Morgan Spurlock. So it started out this analytical sort of physical change of what happens when you, and this was all raw. He was eating all raw, nothing cooked. 100% raw, 100% vegan. Put him in yoga, gave him colonics. I didn't give him colonics. Sent him to get colonics. And what ended up happening was like all of this emotional upheaval. Like all of this stuff came forward around had no relationship with his daughter. Daughter wouldn't speak to him based on past discretions. Discovered he was addicted to all of these pills. Essentially on antidepressants. And he just, again, got lucky. He was one of the most outgoing, extroverted, hilarious
Sicilian dude from
Sicilian
Brooklyn.
from New York, just made fun of Café Gratitude at all the stuff you could imagine to make fun of Café Gratitude for, which I love. I'm totally game for. so it made it really fun and enjoyable, and incredibly authentic and transparent on camera. You know, him crying, trying to like wean himself off of like antidepressants, like spilling out like of his, you know, his pills, and breaking up with his girl. All these things happen just magically. Like I'm 23, like videotaping in his living room, being like, what is going on? Like I thought we were gonna like talk about food, and all the screaming, yelling, all this. So, and it mostly became a documentary about like the human experience and the areas we all get stuck. And really, when you mess with people's food, that brings up a lot of stuff. Totally brings up, it's like all of our original addictions. And all of this stuff changed. He's now a motivational speaker. It got to the point where he was thinner than me. Still thin. He ended up losing 50 pounds in the course of the so basically about a pound a day, and is now makes a living speaking around sobriety and you know, transformational aspects of life, because people have seen the film and want him to come speak at their place. And yeah, total, I mean, one of the most budget documentaries you could ever watch, but the fact that
It's so good.
there's,
What's it called again?
May I Be Frank?
it's called May I Be Frank. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to spill all of it, but it turned out well. I was happy with it. But it was one of those things that was a surprise, like,
But here's an example of how it's a life you transformed. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I struggle to take credit. That's uncomfortable for me to take
Okay.
credit for, but yes, I mean, it was super moving to watch, and something that I couldn't have written out script-wise, and grateful for the experience. Still a friend of mine, lives in LA.
Oh, he does now.
I'll be at like stoplight and I'll see him like zoom by in his convertible, and I'm like, that's Frank. Like, what the hell is going on?
Oh my God, if I ever spot him, I'm totally going to attack him. Be like, Frank!
Like, he would love it. He's a heavy ladies man. So yeah, check it out if you want. It's online.
Sure, Caitlin, please.
So I think it's so fascinating. You attribute a lot of things that you've been very successful doing, you and your family, to like luck. If we were just on the forefront of this natural movement, or we got so lucky with Frank, but do you ever sometimes sit back and think like you just were doing the right thing at every turn in the business, and by doing the right thing tends to just manifest success?
Sure. I think that. Yeah, I hope so. You know, I've also had the experience that no good deed goes unpunished on some level, but yeah, I think that I'm most successful when I'm not overthinking things and I'm just trying things all the time. Some of them work out. With every, you know, you mentioned successes, but there's twice as many failures surrounding all of those. So I think it's not being attached and continuing to try. And you're inspired? Great. Do it. Don't get so wrapped up and it's got to all align and be like the perfect branding book. Let me make my deck. It's just like, keep going, you know? That I think has helped. But yeah.
So if people want to connect with you, like on social media, where can they find you?
I mean, you can connect with me via the restaurants. I mean, on I guess Instagram, Cary the Strange, but there's nothing really profound happening on there. It's just pictures of my kid. But I'm at, you know, any of the restaurants, you'll see me popping in. Gracias, Madre, or Café Gratitude. And if you can email me at cary.mosier@cafegratitude.com if there's questions you didn't ask or you think of afterwards, happy to answer. And if you see me in the restaurant, say hi and I'll buy you a drink. You'll get a free margarita out of me. And, you know, say hi. And I also want to give a shout out to one of my best friends in the audience, Wendy Hayworth, who is the designer of Gracias, Madre, and is the reason it looks so pretty.
Yes. Yes.
So if you don't know her, you should get to know her and have her design whatever your business or house is. She's very talented, and I like that she's here. She's one of the people, remember, I was like, now we got designers and lighters. So you can blame her for it looking so pretty and the up north ones looking so crappy. Yeah, she's the one to blame.
He's super difficult to work with.
Yeah, that's true. I'm like, let's macrame everything.
Well, I want to thank you again. I am filled with gratitude having this conversation. I feel like I learned a lot tonight. I hope everybody feels like they took away something of value, but I know I definitely did. So I really appreciate your being honest and open and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you. Thanks for
All
inviting
right.
me.
Thanks, everybody.